Sorry, Democrats, you blew it. The partisan nonsense about the Mueller report, it's just not working. And now Attorney General William Barr has decided to skip tomorrow's testimony in front of the House Judiciary Committee. And can you blame him? Will Democrats double down and subpoena the nation's top lawman? I think they will. Barr testified today in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Democrats have claimed to want answers as to why Barr chose not to charge the president with obstruction. And the AG asked and then answered the questions many of us have been wondering. Watch.
How did we get to the point here where the evidence is now that the president was falsely accused of colluding with the Russians and accused of being treasonous and accused of being a Russian agent, and the evidence now is that was without a basis, and 2 years of his administration have been dominated by the allegations that have now been proven false. And, you know, to listen to some of the rhetoric, you would think that the Mueller report had found the opposite.
Well, Democrats responded with a bunch of predictable grandstanding, as they always do during these things. Oh, let's start with Hawaii's Mazie Hirono, shall we? Mazie, come on, girl.
Mr. Barr, now the American people know that you are no different from Rudy Giuliani or Kellyanne Conway or any of the other people who sacrificed their once decent reputation for the grifter and liar who sits in the Oval Office.
Yes, she called the president a grifter and a liar in order to smear the AG. And then we have Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, who brought up Michael Cohen for some reason and then got shut down by the AG. Watch.
The report found that Michael Cohen's testimony to the House before it, that the president repeatedly implied that Cohen's family members had committed crimes. Do you consider that evidence to be an attempt to convince a witness to change testimony?
No. I don't think that could pass muster, those public statements he was making.
All right, Barr did have some senators in his corner, also predictably, including South Carolina Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham.
Do you expect to change your mind about the bottom line conclusions of the Mueller report?
No.
Do you know Bob Mueller?
Yes.
Do you trust him?
Yes.
How long have you known him?
30 years, roughly.
You think he had the time he needed?
Yes.
You think he had the money he needed?
Yes.
Do you think he had the resources he needed?
Yes.
Do you think he did a thorough job?
Yes.
So did the Attorney General make his case, and is he right to skip tomorrow's testimony? Joining me tonight, former White House Press Secretary and America First action-packed senior advisor, Sean Spicer is back. Welcome back, Sean.
Good evening, Kennedy. Thanks for having me.
Mixed reviews for the Attorney General. He definitely tussled with some of the senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Kamala Harris gave him a tough time, and he did stumble there. I thought it was odd when he talked about the Mueller report being his baby. Was there anything here that was problematic for you?
No, not really. I think he was calm, cool, and collective. He really walked through the legal reaction to this, if you will. In other words, he broke down in each question why the rhetoric didn't make sense from a legal basis, and that's what this was. And I think we've lost perspective as to what this was about. A special counsel was appointed by the Department of Justice to look into this matter. That special counsel reports to the Attorney General during Attorney General Sessions' tenure, reported to the Deputy Attorney General. But this report was always intended for the Attorney General. The Attorney General went a big step further by not only releasing it to Congress, but to the American people. And I think that what he did today was explain the process, explain the conclusions. And I think the other thing that's interesting is, and you alluded to this, is that we've lost focus on the fact that none of the Democrats were actually in no way contesting the underlying fact that there was no collusion. In fact, to hear the Democrats today, collusion, they kept saying, collusion's not even a legal term. Why are we talking about it? And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, I heard that for about 7 months nonstop, and now suddenly the Democrats have pivoted to, well, it's never been about collusion. And I think they've lost focus on what they're actually fighting for, and now talking about a bunch of process questions. Why did you write a 4-page memo the way you did? Were you concerned that this reaction, as opposed to
okay, let me ask you about that, because there were a lot of questions about that summary, which I guess really isn't a summary, depending on who you ask. And the Attorney General said this was such a pressing matter because of the public interest in the case and for the amount of time that it had gone on, and the fact that it centered around the president and took so much energy from his administration. Therefore, he felt obligated to put something out. Do you think in hindsight that he shouldn't have released that 4-page document to members of Congress and to the public?
No, I think he did the right thing, and here's why. He made it very clear that they expected to get a redacted version from the special counsel that they would have been able to turn around much quicker. That wasn't the case. And so what the Attorney General said today is, much like you would release a verdict summary right after a trial, and then the transcript of that trial comes out days later, he was trying to make sure that the American people in Congress understood the bottom line. And again, getting back to what I said a moment ago, the bottom line was always, was there collusion with the Russians or any other entity that sought to undermine the integrity of our elections? And the Attorney General's summary, or whatever we're calling it now, came out and made it clear that no, there wasn't. And that was what the main thrust of the special counsel's investigation was about. And here's the further point. Again, this is why this is such a silly conversation that the Democrats were having today, which is within days after that summary, the entire 400-plus page report came out. Meaning, if you didn't agree with the summary, well, now you've got it all out there in a searchable way that you can look up, read it yourself, come to your own conclusions.
I still think their issue is with special counsel and Robert Mueller's office in the investigation. And clearly the issue they have there was that the president wasn't charged with anything, and they're making the case that the Office of Legal Counsel basically informed them that you can't charge a sitting president. And if that's really the case, and Mueller was so invested in the fact that the president had broken the law, that he could have pushed that issue by charging him, forcing it through the court system so we could finally have a definitive legal answer on that most important question. Because if the president is so powerful that he can't be charged and he can essentially fire anyone, then that's a problem that's above the pay grade of the Attorney General and the presidency.
Well, the other thing is the special counsel could have just said it. He could have said, while I don't believe that the president could be charged, I do believe that there's a violation in one of these 10 instances that I've laid out, that I believe there was obstruction. He didn't do that.
He could have, you're right, he could have given a clearer bottom line, but instead, I think intentionally created this fuzziness that's open for interpretation by both sides to benefit each side politically. And I think, in a sense, given the amount of time and the amount of resources and the amount of money, I think that's cowardly.
Well, but here's the other thing. The Democrats put all of their stock in Mueller, right? So they said he is this man above reproach, highest integrity, professional standards, et cetera, et cetera.
A lot of Republicans said the very same thing.
Great, fine. But my point is that when he didn't reach the conclusions that they assumed he would, now they have a problem. But Mueller, in any way, shape, or form, could have done this. And think about this. This is the other thing. Every single thing about this report and its handling and the way it's been handled over the past 2 years has leaked out in some way, shape, or form, including the letter, including the fact that there was dissatisfaction.
Not everything. There was a lot about special counsel that was not leaked out, and people on both sides were surprised that Robert Mueller was running that kind of ship. The only other entity who's that good with leaks is the First Lady.
But fair enough. But my point in this is to say that if there was a sense among the team that the president had violated the law in any way in terms of obstruction, that would be getting out. His team would make sure that that got out, and it hasn't. And that's because everybody put stock in the fact that there was this underlying sense of collusion or illegality of some sort.
Yeah, and we have these terms that are meaningless: conspiracy, collusion, exoneration. They're all things that now really don't mean anything. And I think that the chaotic environment benefits the most partisan among us. It was very good to see you Friday night, Sean Spicer. Thank you so much.